show.
I mean, I won't say it on the air. I just mean say
You
it to you.
you don't even have to do that. Everybody knows.
Yeah, that's true. Everybody knows.
Everybody knows. So
Um,
anyway, so I really came in because I spent 14 years.
Thank you, sir. Is the headphone volume level for you? Is that
I
good?
can hear you.
Okay.
okay. You hear me all right? It's
I
fine?
can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, and I'm already rolling, so we should be good to go.
Okay. And let me just get one thing going here. All right. You want to get us shaking hands, Tim? All right.
Get it.
All right. All right, welcome back to the Ross Kaminsky Show here on Talk Radio 630 KHOW. I am broadcasting from the Western Governors Association annual meeting in Vail, Colorado. If you got to work somewhere, might as well be in Vail, right? A beautiful day here, and so pleased to be joined by Governor Laura Kelly, Governor of Kansas, Democrat. Governor of Kansas, not
I
something
am.
you hear all the time, a Democratic governor of Kansas. So welcome to Colorado. Congratulations. Welcome to the WGA. We got a lot of things to talk about, but let me just start with the congratulations part.
Well, thank you, Ross, and it should be a welcome back. I actually
Yes.
lived in Colorado for 7 years, many years ago. My first daughter was actually born in Denver.
What brought you to Colorado at that time?
The weather, the ability to do lots of outdoor adventures. In fact, I was living in New York before I moved to Denver, and I just sold my car, sold my condo, quit my job, and came to Denver, and I figured I'd make it work.
Uh-huh. I get it. I lived in New York, too, before that. So just tell us in 30 seconds or a minute or whatever you want to give us on your professional background and how you ended up being governor of Kansas.
Well, just very quickly, I actually started my work in the mental health field. I worked in a state psychiatric facility for children in New York.
Wow.
After that, that's when I then came to Denver, and I worked at National Jewish Hospital for respiratory and immune disease back when they had inpatients. And I was director of recreation therapy and physical education there for 7 years, I believe. And then met and married my husband at National Jewish, and he wanted to get out of research and go into clinical work. And so we looked around, and there were opportunities in Kansas for both of us. And so we decided to move there and raise our family and make our life.
Wow. And when did you get involved in government?
Well, it just so happened when I moved into Topeka, Kansas, location is everything, and my neighborhood was a very political neighborhood. In fact, it ended up, I was next door neighbors to a former governor of the state of Kansas, Kathleen Sebelius. And so when Kathleen was getting out, as she was in the State House, when she was going to be moving from that position, running for insurance commissioner, she asked if I would run for her House seat. I said, no, my kids were too young. It was not a family-friendly job. So, but 10 years later, my senator had been defeated, and someone who came in To the Senate, I didn't feel represented the residents very well. At that point, I decided I'd go ahead and jump in. My daughter was old enough at that point, so that's what did it. And I was displeased with his service because he was voting against public education. There's nothing more important to Kansans than their education system.
And there's been a lot of with the previous governor's tax cuts and all this. It's been a huge thing in your state, and I probably only know enough to be dangerous and not enough to be helpful in that conversation. But that was obviously a huge issue. What is it like for you? And I know you haven't been governor for very long yet, but you are a Democratic governor in a fairly red state. Your Republican opponent, who I won't name, I will just say personally, I found him to be not a very appealing candidate, and even though I typically lean a little bit right, I would have found it very hard to support him. So I think obviously a lot of people felt that way. You're a Democratic governor in a fairly red state. How does that impact the way you think about doing your job?
Well, I think that people elected me to be governor because they were tired of the extreme and policies that just didn't work. Governor Brownback slashed our income taxes, trying to go to zero in income taxes so we could be like Texas in 2012, in 2013 again. It absolutely decimated our state. We lost more revenue in 1 year with those tax cuts than we did during the entire Great Recession. And then it just continued. And he robbed every piggy bank we had to fill in the holes in the budget. Our children's program suffered, our transportation program suffered, foster care system exploded because we couldn't keep kids out of foster care. We didn't have the resources. Education was cut significantly. It just on and on and on and on. And people were just tired of it. They didn't like the extreme partisanship that Brownback brought from Washington, D.C. to Kansas. Because as much as people think it's odd that a Democrat is governor of Kansas, it happens all the time. In the last 60 years, half the time the governor has been a Democrat, half the time the governor's been a Republican.
It's like getting Republican governors in Massachusetts, which happens a lot more than people would think.
Absolutely. We've got one in Maryland. So people just want common sense, good, no-nonsense government. And that's what I promised, and that's what we're delivering. All
right. And before I get to some specific issues, while we're here broadcasting from the Western Governors Association annual meeting, give us some thoughts on what WGA means to you at this point and what you expect WGA to what you can do with them to help not just Kansas but the entire West, including Colorado.
Well, Ross, I'm a real policy wonk, and that's what WGA is about.
Right.
More so than some of the other national associations. They really focus on policy issues, and for years Kansas did not participate, but I decided that we would get re-engaged because while we have a lot of differences from our real western states like Colorado and Utah and whatnot, where you have this vast amount of public lands, and I think Kansas has the fewest acres of public land in the country. But other things we share, we all have water issues that we have to deal with. We've got other environmental issues that we deal with. We've got rural areas that we're trying to figure out how to keep them prosperous or to make them more prosperous. So we just share a lot of common concerns, and there's no better way to do that than to come and sit with your peers in a policy-driven environment and really talk about those issues and take back to your state some possible solutions.
Yeah, and everybody I've spoken to, all the governors, staffers, this organization really does do a tremendous job of staying away from partisanship, and it really is about looking for solutions. One of the key reasons that I was really looking forward to speaking with you today is that Kansas borders Colorado, and there are some issues that happen just because of that, and I wanted to ask you about a couple of them. You mentioned water, and there's some stuff that is above my pay grade that I can't say I fully understand. A friend of mine, a former state senator, says we have a water issue in far eastern Colorado driven by Kansas suing Nebraska and then Nebraska suing us. He says because of that, we drained a reservoir in eastern Colorado. Western Kansas residents and eastern Colorado would like to see it filled up again, but we can't allow it to have water in it unless Kansas forgives the evaporative and seepage losses. So first of all, my head wants to explode.
Okay.
Second of all, I don't know how many lawyers are involved with this conversation, but what do I do with this?
Several, I can guarantee
So
you the way that's worded.
Do you? This is all Republican River Interstate Compact stuff.
I remember this. This was years ago when we did sue Nebraska, and I believe we won. So more power to us. I didn't understand that there was any fallout in Colorado, though, so it's not something I'm very familiar with. Though I do know that even right now that there are issues with water availability from Colorado coming into Kansas. So we've got a very strong team that will be heading up our water authority and other agencies where water flows into. And my style has been collaborative, and I have hired people who have that same style. So whatever the issue is here, we'll sit down and try to work it out.
It's water stuff is incredibly complicated, and I really don't know much about it. I'm sure you've heard this saying that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting.
Yeah.
And it feels that way sometimes. What about marijuana? Right, the previous governor. I mean, I didn't know him, but I assume a staunch anti-drug sort of guy, and probably the guy you beat would have been as well. But it's legal in the state of Colorado. We border Kansas. I'm sure there's plenty of people driving between the states.
Could be.
And, some of the governors of the states that border us on the east have been real upset about it. How do you feel about it? And do you expect Kansas to change any kind of laws? Would you push for any kinds of laws of liberalization in that direction?
I expect that we will. Kansas generally follows the rest of the country a little bit behind, 10, 20 years. When I moved to Kansas, it was a dry state. In order to get liquor by the drink, if you went out for dinner, you had to belong to a club. So, but that got overturned by a constitutional amendment in 1986. I'm just from what I know, from what we've discussed in the legislature, I was in the legislature for 14 years, the conversation about legalizing medical marijuana is I think much closer to passing. This past session, the legislature did pass a bill that basically takes away criminality should a parent use CBD oil for a child with seizure disorder. So it will take those small steps, but I think we'll get to medical marijuana sooner than later. Recreational marijuana will take a little longer for Kansas to get there.
If I recall correctly, I think Utah just legalized medical, and
I believe that's right.
And if Utah could do it, anyone can, right?
I think one of the ways that we will look at it is looking at our sentencing guidelines and seeing what we want to do with those kinds of first time, second time, minor drug offenses. We've been locking those folks up. Our prisons are overcrowded, and it's really inappropriate for people to go into our prison system on a conviction like that. They'd be much better off at most going into treatment perhaps, but we're not doing them, their families, their employers any good.
Yeah.
And
or taxpayers.
And it's costing us a fortune. So I think that's the way we're going to approach the issue of recreational marijuana in the not very distant future.
My special guest, Governor Laura Kelly of Kansas. I'll tell you what. Let me ask you one more. A lot of the terrible weather we've had, sort of central eastern United States, a lot of flooding. How much has that impacted Kansas? And to the extent that it has, have you had an opportunity to view any of that yourself?
I have. I have spent more time in a Black Hawk helicopter than I ever expected to. My dad used to fly helicopters when I was a kid, so I spent some time then, but I've surpassed that amount. Kansas has been impacted, and we're still not out of the woods yet. There's a lot of snowpack north, and there's a need for those folks to release water, around the South Dakota area, bordering on Nebraska. So we're anticipating, even without a lot more new rain, that we're going to still see some of the impact of these past rains. We did declare a number, I think it's all up to half of our counties disaster areas. There was
Wow.
a presidential declaration that President Trump issued for us, which was very helpful. So, we're doing it. The thing that's been most impressive to me, aside from the spirit of Kansans, which I've known about for a long time, but, the ability and passion of our emergency management folks, both at the state level and at the local level. We had people working, nearly round the clock for weeks at a time. Absolutely bone tired, but would not give up, and were there doing what they needed to do to make things work.
That's great to see. I mean, as a governor, it must be, heartbreaking to see your state citizens suffering, and also, a little frustrating in the sense that a governor can do a lot, but you're not God.
Hmm.
I can only imagine. I wish your helicopter rides were for more of a fun reason than that.
There'll be some of those, too.
There'll be some of those too, I'm sure. All right, in our last moments together, any words for Coloradans, especially since you used to live here as governor of Kansas now? Anything for your neighbors?
Well, I am very fond of Coloradans. I still have family who live here, so I am back often. But I would welcome them all to come visit us, too. They'd be surprised what we've got going for us in Kansas.
Very good. Governor Laura Kelly of Kansas, thanks so much for joining me today. And maybe next time you come back, if you end up in Denver, come join me in studio, and we'll talk some more. I'd love to see you.
I'll do that.
All right.
Take care.
Everyone, Governor Laura Kelly, newly elected Democratic governor of Kansas. Thanks for the conversation. Keep it right here on the Ross Kaminsky Show.